Good afternoon. My name is Denise Fairchild, President and CEO of Emerald Cities Collaborative, and very pleased to be a part of the Good Jobs, Green Jobs Conference. This is an important panel that we have that's really going to talk to us about what does it take to reimagine, re-engineer, and rebuild America. And we're talking about this in a way that is not about how to rebuild America's infrastructure the low-cost way, but the way that we like to think about it, each of you at this conference, is how to rebuild America the high-value way, a way in which we fundamentally not only strengthen our infrastructure to address climate change, and again, for those that may not believe in climate change, the reality is, I like the way Governor Cuomo said it, we have a 100-year flood every 2 years. So, believing it or not, we've got to figure out how we build an infrastructure to withstand the extreme weather conditions that we face in every region of this America. But as we rebuild this infrastructure, then we have to also think about the value in that investment to make sure that investment is generating the multipliers that we're looking for, which is rebuilding America's middle class, putting people back to work, making certain they're making decent wages, getting benefits, and building careers. And just as important in that equation is how we ensure the new demographics, low-income communities of color get a chance to have a piece of the pie. So we have an amazing panel today to speak to this issue. And they will address it as labor leaders, as politicians, community organizations, people who are actually at the forefront of making a difference in all of these spaces of infrastructure: water, transportation, utility, in our schools. So I just say, let's get busy. What do you think? All right. So let me first start with introductions. They're, I think, sitting alphabetically. We have immediately to my right the Georgia House Minority Leader, Stacey Abrams. Stacey's from the Georgia House District 89. Next to our Minority Leader, we have Michael Langston. Michael is the National President of the Utility Workers Union of America. Michael. And then we have Eric Rodriguez, and he's the Vice President of Public Policy at the National Council of La Raza. And then we have Nancy Stoner, and she's the Assistant Administrator of Water for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And then last but not least, we have Randy Weingarten, the President of the American Federation of Teachers. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to start with, actually, Mr. Langford. Your workers, utility workers of America, are really on the front line, the first responders, when it comes to the effects of hurricanes and tornadoes, you know, and our electricities go out. You know, we're calling up your workers to really put our lives back together. Tell me, what is the state of our utility infrastructure, and what are the particular challenges that your workers face, safety and otherwise, in their day-to-day work?
Well, I'm sure glad you asked me that question, I tell you. Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Mike Langford, and, you know, I'd just like to mention a little bit about the proud women and men that make up the Utility Workers Union. At the work that they do, and you mentioned it, as first responders, you know, they put their lives on the line daily, no matter what kind of condition it may be, man-made or nature. You look at Sandy, and I'll talk a little bit about the impact of Sandy and what we've learned from that and what we need to do from that. But these folks put their lives on the line every day, making sure that you have electricity at your house, that you have fresh drinking water at your house, that you have natural gas to heat your homes. So you see, a lot of times we take these, to me, which should be a human right, for granted. And instead of a profit-driven, Wall Street-driven money machine driven, and that's why our water system in this country is rated at a D-. That's pathetic, folks. Our electric distribution system is rated at a D, our energy system. So let me just kind of back up a little bit and start out with electricity. I'd just like to touch on each of those elements that I just mentioned. Thomas Edison, anybody ever hear that guy? Invented the light bulb, right? But when he invented that light bulb, he said, hey, we have to have a way to get the electricity to that light bulb. So Thomas Edison actually created the first transmission distribution system in the United States. Okay, we were the first country to have that. But if you could bring Edison back today, you know, and put an iPad in front of him, LED lighting, he'd probably be a little confused. But you put him in the transmission and distribution system, he'd be right at home, like nothing happened, like nothing happened. That first distribution and transmission system was built in New York. So what happens? Sandy comes through, destroys that system. So what do? They build it back the same way they just blew it down with. Does that make sense? There's so much new technology out there. The line loss that we get in electricity alone is phenomenal. Let me give you an example of some of the things that we could do in electricity. The Chinese has created a transmission line that will transmit 1,000,000 volts, 1,000,000 kW, okay? They transmit it from the west side of China to the east side of China, over a 1,200-mile radius. They have a 7% line loss in voltage. The largest lines that we have in the United States is 765 kV. What would you think that same line loss would be over that distance, that 1,200 miles? Anybody just throws a number out? 80%. 80%. Look how much there in itself, by not advancing in new technology like Asia and Europe is doing, could we conserve on generation alone? Okay? That's just a small example in electricity. Let's move on to water. Okay, fresh drinking water due to leaky pipes. And how many did you know in this room that there's still wooden water pipes in the ground? We actually have wooden water pipes in the ground. We lose 7 billion gallons of fresh water every day at a cost of $91 million. That's why that system's rated a D-. Our fresh water and wastewater systems are really at the end of their life. And these are good jobs rebuilding this. Don't we owe it to ourselves as a country to have an A+ system? You know, when you look at those poor ratepayers out there, those communities in those underprivileged neighborhoods, they're not getting what they're paying for, brothers and sisters. And if you don't pay, they cut you off, right? So you can see in the water system alone, by saving 7 billion gallons of water a day, how much electricity you would save in turn too, because it takes a lot of electricity to create fresh water. And it even is more with some of the other types of water, with desalination and so on and so forth. To transmit water, it even takes a lot of electricity to transmit. So in just those two areas alone, we could conserve and really green up this economy a tremendous amount just in those two aspects alone, by reinvesting into our infrastructure.
So, Mike, let me ask you this. I mean, in some ways, you're speaking to the choir, and I think it's fabulous that you're giving us the facts. Now, we also understand, what's the problem? Why can't we get a home run on this? Why can't we get that A+? And my understanding is that there is such a thing called the Energy Independence Act going on throughout states like Ohio and North Carolina and Louisiana, where they're trying to turn back energy standards, portfolio standards. What's going on, and what do we need to do as a community?
Well, in like Ohio, they're trying, they being the utilities, to reverse renewable standards, and not only renewable standards, but conservation, energy efficiency programs. And we're saying we're not going backward. That's our position as a union. We are not going backward. You know. Let me just briefly, and I know you got a lot to cover here, but I just want to mention with gas too, natural gas. You have wooden gas lines in the ground also. And we've been having explosions, San Bruno, Philadelphia, Allentown, Massachusetts, Kansas City, throughout this nation. But that's not the only factor of blowing up subdivisions and everything else due to leaking pipes and rusty pipes. there's a 2 to 3% methane leak of natural gas that leaks into the atmosphere, which equates to about 120 million automobiles. Just fixing all these things, putting money into it. Remember I said, this is no longer your homegrown backyard utility. This is all about Wall Street and executive compensation. And we need to fix these by forcing the regulators in those states to make these utilities, to put the money, to make sure that you're paying for an A-plus system and not a third world country system. That's where we need to take this. And that's how we're going to win this, is by putting people back to work, replacing these pipes, replacing these transmission lines, creating generation, and so on and so forth. So,
Thank you. We'll come back. Representative Abrams.
Yes.
Talk to us about Georgia. Georgia is actually, Atlanta, well, 2 levels, making really inroads in the transportation infrastructure. Talk to us about the Atlanta Beltline. What is that doing to the local economy? What's happening in terms of the job opportunities that's coming out of that? Just give us an understanding of how important transportation is in terms of this infrastructure work that we need to do.
If I can, I'm going to tie that to what Mike just talked about. If you think about any business, you've got workers, you've got your machinery that produces your product, and you've got your logistics, how you get it to places. And a government is nothing more than a really large business. In fact, it is the largest business in most communities. And the idea is essentially that you produce workers, those are your residents, your education, your training, your machinery is your infrastructure. If your infrastructure is crumbling, you can't produce your product. And your logistics is your transportation. It's how you get your things from place to place. And Atlanta and Georgia have faced, we, I think, are on the D scale sliding down. We were forced by the EPA, actually, to work on our water. But until they sue you, you probably aren't going to get it done. And thank you. Seriously, thank you. Because I was the lawyer who helped get it done, so you kept me employed for quite some time. But the reality for Atlanta was that we had to address our water issue, but at the same time, we had to be thinking to the future. And at the time, Mayor Shirley Franklin, in cooperation with our City Council President Kathy Woolard, came upon an idea that was actually created by a college student at Georgia Tech. Actually, he was a grad student. And he wrote a paper about connecting the rail lines in Atlanta that had existed when Atlanta first started. Atlanta used to be called Terminus. We were basically the end of the transportation line for the rail system that was coming through the South. And he thought, well, if you could connect those rail lines, you could create a 22-mile circle, a belt line around the city of Atlanta. That would be 22 miles of trails, transit, parks. And if you have trails, if you have transit, if you have parks, you will have economic development because people like to go where they can get to and what's pretty. And so businesses will crop up there. Because they're businesses, you'll find residential development. And so Mayor Franklin made a very bold decision to invest in the creation of the Beltline. It's a 25-year project, and with the help of organizations like Stand Up Georgia, Georgia Stand Up, it's a project that has very intentionally involved the community from the very first day. When I left the city as its attorney, I actually helped design the community engagement process. And the reason I mention that is that because the community was engaged from the outset, they've been able to keep pressure on the city and on the nonprofit organizations driving the Beltline to hold true to their initial promise. Because an idea 25 years in the future has a long, you talk about loss of power, 80% loss of power. Imagine an 80% loss of memory of what you're supposed to be doing. And so what this community engagement project has done is really driven not only development around the Beltline, but development in quadrants, meaning that every area of the city, we divide the city into 4 quadrants. Development has to happen evenly. So it's not just development in the wealthier sides of the city. It's development in all 4 quadrants at the same time. Now, not everyone gets everything at the exact same moment, but there is always a project ongoing in every one of those quadrants. What that has led to has been, I think, the beginning of a transformative opportunity for the city. But the most important part of this, beyond the jobs that it's creating, the green space it's creating, is how we're paying for it. And I think this is a piece that is often overlooked. The city is paying for the bulk of the Beltline. This is a multi-billion-dollar project, and we don't have a lot of money. But the way we're paying for it is by leveraging those pieces of government that are out there that often those on our side of the aisle kind of ignore. We're using tax credits. We're not only relying on federal and state funding, but we're actually generating our own revenue. There are pension funds that most of you are a part of that can put pressure on your organizations to buy the bonds that need to be let to pay for these projects. There are tax incentives that can be taken advantage of to build those projects. And I'll wrap it up by saying this: the Beltline is emblematic of a local government deciding it's not going to wait for the state to decide it's going to act, because Atlanta and Georgia are two very different places. But what it has decided to do is to find ways to invest now, build for the future, and hold ourselves accountable. And I think that when you go back to the analogy of us being like a business, if you had a business that had crumbling infrastructure, that had broken logistics, and that had workers who couldn't do the jobs they were hired to do, any company worth its salt would have three options. Your first option is to go bankrupt. In Georgia, we're not allowed to go bankrupt, so we're going to have to fix our problems eventually. Some states can do it, other states can't. Your second option is to just kind of chug along in mediocrity, to be the B-, D+ infrastructure, to not really accomplish anything. And with all due respect to anyone out here who likes it, I'm from Coca-Cola country, so I would say being the RC Cola of states. Not bad, not good. No one wakes up going, oh, I can't wait to get an RC Cola, but you'll drink it if it's there. Or you can do what the right kind of government, the right kind of business does, and that is say, we're going to do a capital call, we're going to ask for more investment, we're going to spend money now for return on investment later. And I think that's what this conference is about. That's what the BG Alliance is about. It's about demanding a capital call. But government is the only business where we expect a higher return on investment than we're willing to put in, and we expect somebody else to pay for it. But if we're willing to invest in it, it can be done, and I think that's what the Beltline demonstrates in Atlanta.
Fabulous, fabulous. If you're going to do it, this is the right way to do it, making sure the community's engaged and the partnerships are developing a comprehensive strategy. Thank you so much. I want to go back to Atlanta and Georgia being two different worlds, but we'll see if we have time for that. Let me get to Nancy Stoner. So we've talked about the energy grid and transportation and gas. What's up with water?
Well, I haven't ever met Mike Langford before, but he and I are singing from the same song sheet here. So water, of course, essential to life. There's no substitute, and every business in the United States needs water and wastewater. So it's pretty obvious that we need to invest in those water and wastewater infrastructure that Mike was telling you about, and the D- that we have currently in our ratings. And the good news is that those investments create jobs, and it's great to be here with all of you who know that. So I'm grateful for the opportunity today. So what are we talking about? $600–700 billion worth of needs to replace those deteriorating pipes, the ones that you paid for, that your parents paid for, to build those structures that are providing safe tap water to you and your families, providing beaches you can swim in, rivers you can fish in. But the bad news is that we are letting the systems deteriorate, and we need to put that investment in. The good news is that if we put in that investment, we create lots of jobs. For every $1 billion invested, we get between 15,000 and 40,000 jobs. So that is a lot of jobs, and a lot of good paying jobs for people across the country, all kinds of different jobs. Architects, planners, construction workers, irrigation specialists, pipe layers, maintenance work, all kinds of work, and a job ladder so that people can move up, can learn how to do the landscaping, to do the design, to do the engineering. So jobs for people at every type of work and in every community across the United States. And investment in water and wastewater infrastructure creates more jobs than investment in other kinds of infrastructure. And New York City recently did a survey that shows that investment in green infrastructure, which is the kind of infrastructure that relies on trees, green roofs, rain gardens, permeable pavement, that creates the most salary dollar per dollar invested. And that's because that's not big machinery, but instead people designing, installing, and maintaining infrastructure that mimics natural functions and provides the most environmental benefits. So those investments, they're good for the economy, they're good for the environment, they're good for public health, and we deserve it. We deserve those jobs, and we owe it to future generations to make sure that they have the water and wastewater infrastructure, that they have safe tap water to drink, that they have waters they can use, as we have had from the investments that our mothers and forefathers have made for us. And so that's the good news about what we can do on water and wastewater infrastructure. We're working with communities across the country to do that. We have a new project with the Veterans Administration to help veterans get jobs in the water and wastewater sector. We have a lot of projects with community colleges, with schools, high schools, colleges all across the country, letting people know about these job opportunities. And they're expected to be large as the population grows. We need more water and wastewater infrastructure. As climate change affects our water resources, we'll have more jobs. And we have a lot of people aging out of those jobs. And so we'll have lots of opportunities. We need to work together to train people to get into those good jobs and help us preserve our economy and our environment.
Thank you. So Nancy, Eric, Nancy set you up real nicely here. She talked about the jobs, and I guess the big question is jobs for whom? There was a study that just came out last week that looked at the role of the women in the green economy and found that we ain't there. We're not in the economy at the level at which we should be. Tell us about your recent study and the demographic shifts that's taken place in America and how we engage communities of color in this new emerging economy.
Well,
what are the challenges?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you. First, thank you for inviting me to be here. I think these are issues and areas that we have a lot to learn about, going forward. So having the opportunity to be here, I think, is very important for leaders in the civil rights community. For those of you who don't know who we are, NCLR is a 45-year-old civil rights organization. And we have affiliates in many different states, as well as a presence in many states. As we evolved over time, we know that state-level policy is increasingly important, and we've got to be involved in those areas. And the center of issues that we're talking about here, whether it's infrastructure that helps us in disaster situations, or climate, or the promise and economic opportunity that's out there and jobs, is an important conversation for more and more Latinos to be involved in, and community leaders to be involved in going forward. I tell people, when I came to Washington 20 years ago to work on Latino-specific civil rights issues, we would walk in right after the 1990 census and we would say, look, Latinos, they need investments in education, they need investments in jobs, the poverty rate is outstanding, we've got to do something about this. And we are 4% of the population, take that. And we'll be 4.5% before you know it. So as you can imagine, those who felt very sympathetically and understood civil rights issues were very responsive to those issues, but virtually no one else. And 20 years later, look at these numbers. So we've got 23% of our school-age kids today are Latino. In a number of decades, 30% of the U.S. labor force is going to be Latino. 800,000 Latino kids turn voting age eligible every single year, and will for the next 15 years. And so these are numbers that are astounding to us in the civil rights community. So I would tell you, when we see them coming out demographically, it's quite amazing to see. And what we know is that there's great opportunity going forward. And what we've learned with respect to fighting for civil rights causes for our community, and we are not new to controversial and difficult issues, as many of you may guess, is that you have to have alliances. You need deep collaborations. You got to work together, and it's got to be authentic. And I think those are many of the things and the experiences that we bring. In the scope of these kinds of issues, we could not have been able to build our own authentic agenda around energy issues without the support of Sierra Club, who provided us opportunities to do a national poll without the League of Conservation Voters, which helped us to do teletown halls and other kinds of community events in the states in key places. We need partners, and alliances are ultimately going to be crucial for us to win on these major transformational issues that are ahead of us because of demographics too, but also because, you know, as a result of our research, what we find is the opportunity is there. And in some places throughout the country, in cities that are emerging, there's some infrastructure, there's some opportunity for Latino workers and community organizations to get involved. But by and large, there isn't national access. There are real barriers to participation. Those barriers to participation must be dealt with from a public policy perspective. Hopefully in a transformational and broader policy discussion, but if not, then we've got to go into the states and we've got to be working with partners to fix the law and fix policies in ways that opens up more opportunity for all. So these are the experiences that we bring to the table as we look ahead and take the long view. We know that Latino voters, Latino workers, Latino school teachers and others need to be important players in solving some of our thorniest and trickiest issues, which include many of the ones that we're talking to today. And I think we look forward to taking on that opportunity as well.
Okay, well, I'm going to push you just a little bit.
Please do.
That is because I have a Generation Xer, young black male, and I have a millennium child. One wants to be a rapper, and the other wants to be, you know, a computer whiz. These are tough jobs. When we're talking about utility lines, energy, and transportation, and you know, these are hard jobs that our young people aren't either knowledgeable about or interested in. Are those some of the barriers, and how do we overcome those barriers to make sure that as we rebuild this economy, that we've got people to do it?
Right, so there's a couple of issues. One is, what do we do with the current workers? Can we get them into opportunities? And there are barriers around educational issues, but also certifications that are very, very difficult for Latino workers to break through. And in some places, quite honestly, there are training opportunities, but there aren't any jobs, or there aren't sufficient enough jobs. And so having those kinds of mismatches are things that we're going to have to deal with as well going forward. Long term, a big emphasis on our school system is going to have to be key. Lots of folks talking about more emphasis in computer science training and math and engineering and other opportunities ahead, and making sure that our kids have just as much an opportunity as anyone else to get into those programs and be invested and graduate and be school ready by the time they get into to graduating from high school is going to be crucial going forward.
Great. And I see Mike blinking, but I'm going to hold, I know you've got things to say, but I'd like to at least make sure that Randy talks to us about the schools. They're very pivotal to both the educational work that's involved, the education and training work, but also in terms of actually making our schools healthy, working and living environments. Can you talk about the role of schools?
So let me actually do two things if I can. Number one, we've all talked about what we would do if there were resources to invest in. And our sister from Georgia talked about a really innovative way of financing. What if I were to tell this audience that a whole bunch of people within the labor movement are trying to see if our pensions can be used for the kind of investment so that we don't have D's all over the place, but we start having A's. And that's what the AFL-CIO with the AFT, SEIU, NEA, firefighters asked me. What we have actually done with the Clinton Global Initiative, we made a commitment a couple of years ago to find $10 billion of our pension systems to invest in this kind of infrastructure. Energy, water, I love that, water, buildings, all sorts of other things. And people thought we were nuts when we said we can find a way to have a financially sound investment for pension funds, create thousands of good jobs, and do the kind of energy-efficient retrofits that we know are necessary in so many different ways. And in the last couple of years, what has happened is that we are halfway to that commitment. New York City, for example, after in the wake of Sandy, and I heard what Mike just said about just redoing the same system, but the New York City Teachers Retirement System devoted $1 billion for infrastructure Sandy relief aid. And the California teachers and California PERS devoted over $1 billion for other infrastructure aid. And just this week, the FLCIO, with President Clinton, with mayors from cities all across the country, are going to actually do or announce the retrofit of the FLCIO building in Washington, D.C., to ensure that it is energy efficient using union labor. So all I'm saying is that we know if we invest in a prudently, fiduciarily sound way, pension funds into infrastructure, if we retrofit and upgrade buildings to make them energy efficient and create those kind of jobs, and then also provide training for current workers to upgrade their skills and to create this new skill base for new workers, that is a win-win-win. And we are out there ready to invest. There is a will, there is loads and loads of funds. The vehicle, though, we need a kind of infrastructure bank, or we need the projects that actually are not taking money from Wall Street into the investment houses' pockets and devoting instead that money to making the projects real. So I say that at first because that's solution-driven unionism. Now, to the point about schools, there's also a win-win-win. To the point about training, this is a bigger issue, which is we are trying to convert schooling from rote memorization and from being a mile wide and an inch deep to doing 3 new things for all kids, not just some kids. I am really tired of hearing that the kids in Beverly Hills can critically think and problem solve and engage in teamwork, but not the kids in Bed-Stuy. We need to make sure that we have the kind of Common Core, which is like the jargon of the education system now, Common Core. But what's behind Common Core is to ensure that all kids, whether they are ELL learners or whether they are from poor neighborhoods or whether they are from rich neighborhoods, all kids should be able to problem solve, critically think, write discursively, and engage in teamwork. And if we start doing that, then the jobs of the future will actually be open to all of God's children. And that's part of what we're trying to do in schools right now. That's why 46 states have actually adopted the Common Core and why our union is full on in terms of trying to get that implemented. Now, we need resources, we need lots of other things, and that's a speech for another day. But if we actually look at what happens in terms of schools itself, let's take schools that are crumbling and what happens with asthmatics. We have right now in our schools, and the last piece I'll say, right now, if we actually helped kids, improved air quality would translate into an estimated 25% drop in asthma, as much as 20% decline in viral illnesses like flu, headaches, and fatigue. So if we found just better ways of retrofitting schools so that they would not be sick buildings, we would see kids in school more, teachers in school more, kids focus more with less headaches, and having more of an opportunity to learn. So at the end of the day, whether we're talking about upgrading schools to make sure that kids don't faint in the summer, or having enough computer technology, or finding a way to reduce mold particularly after big floods, like you said, that happen once every 2 years as opposed to once every 100 years, we would have, again, a win-win-win situation. More learning, better health, more jobs, and better schools. Thank you.
Thank you. So, let me ask you this. How do we make all this happen? I mean, we've got several challenges. I heard challenges at the level of policy, challenges at the level of money, you know, because the $10 billion is just a drop in the pond.
Right.
We have challenges in terms of workforce. What do you see as your challenges? And most importantly, for 1,500 people in this audience, what can we do about the challenges as you see them? And I say, I'm going to go back to the Atlanta, Georgia. I mean, how do you work with a conservative state governor and
State, it's right.
and people that don't believe in climate change and people that are rolling back, you know, renewable standards? What do we do about that?
I think the beginning is that you have to speak to people in the language they understand. If I came in here speaking Swahili, 1 or 2 people might hear me and understand me. Everyone else would be wondering what I'm talking about. And too often we use our language to try to convince people to believe what we believe. My parents are ministers. Their job is to convert you. Their job is to change your soul and make you believe something else. I am not a minister and I don't want to be. My job is to convince you that doing what I want you to do will get you what you want. So when you're talking to a conservative, if their fundamental premise is profit-driven, then talk to them about profit. Talk to them about how what you want them to do will yield the result they want, especially when you're talking to politicians, because our job is to get reelected, and we are best reelected when people like what we've done. And so if you can help us if you can give us the information that will make us seem like we are better than we are, that we can then go put on a poster and put on a flyer, then we will get reelected because we did what you wanted. But if you come to us with language that is not consistent with what we think our values are, or doesn't give us something we can declare that we are the victors on, we won't do it. Because, and I speak for my entire class, knowing that this is a vast oversimplification, we're cowards. We're one of the only groups of people who have to do our job in public all the time. And if you knew that you were going to be on television 24 hours a day doing your job, how well will you do your job? Because the best way to keep your job when that is the principle you're operating under is to be mediocre. Mediocrity is the best guarantee of job security. Because if nobody knows who you are and nobody knows what you did, no one has a reason to get rid of you. What we're talking about is being proactive, progressive, and changing things, and that means we need help doing it. And particularly if you're conservative, because you're coming from a political mindset that says that the government shouldn't be involved, that poor people are poor because, you know, either God smited them or, you know, insert trope here, or that they simply haven't worked hard enough, and we all know that's not true. But if you're going to replace that belief system, you've got to replace it with something that they can hear and understand. And that's true on the progressive side as well. Because on the progressive side, sometimes we forget that money isn't bad. Poor people don't hate rich people. Poor people want to be rich too. Poor people like making money. They like having good jobs. They like job security and taking care of their children. And so on the progressive side, we have to also talk to folks about the fact that creating an infrastructure bank using pension funds is a smart economic play, and that it's not a bad thing to put your money in a place where it's going to make more money. Because the more money we make, the better we can make the country that we believe in. And so I think it's meeting people where they are, speaking to them in a language they can understand, and giving them something that they can declare as a win.
Exactly.
Great. All right, so we have, they gave me the signal. We've got 4 minutes at this point. You each have a minute. Give us the charge. Tell us, you know, your bottom line, how we start making a difference for good jobs, green jobs.
Well, a lot of what you just said is I could repeat, but I won't. The thing is you know, after post-Sandy in New York, we did an analysis. We did a white paper to really look at, interview the workers, the members out there on what went wrong, and what do we need to do to fix it. Number one, it is getting that education to all of our members to get engaged in their communities, to talk to even the community folks, to literally go state by state and do this whole post-Sandy analysis, because you can take that same snapshot, go state by state, and you're going to find the same issues across this country, be it gas, electric, and water. But really, to get our members engaged, every single member that we represent out there needs to be an ambassador on how this infrastructure needs to be fixed within their communities, get the community involvement, get legislation passed, deal with the public service commissions in each state, go state by state and force their hand to reinvest, because every dollar spent, there's like $1.75 that comes back into these investments, which is good for workers and good for communities.
Good. Eric,
In a minute.
in a minute.
Look, I think one of the biggest challenges we've faced, certainly in looking at various movements, including the immigration reform movement, is that we've spent a lot of time talking to ourselves. And I think that's been the hard part, is that we haven't spent enough time and resource in building the kind of relationships and investing in agenda setting collaboratively that are needed to win on big issues. That takes time and energy. And when things are very short-term and transactional, when you're trying to push something over the top for this period of time, you're not thinking and taking the long view, it's hard to realize what you have to do. And again, it comes down to having strong relationships, doing the outreach that's needed. My feeling is building deeper collaborative and authentic relationships at the local and national level is what's needed. Walking in with an agenda and saying, support me, this is my agenda, it just doesn't work. So I think we've got to try things a different way. We've got to build a stronger and longer lasting coalition if we're going to win. And again, I think it just takes some time and energy to do that.
Great, thank you.
I think the thing to do is to get the word out. As I said earlier, you folks know that these are good investments for our society. Make sure that your pensions are being invested wisely in these kinds of investments that make money and make our society better places to live. And get involved in your community with your neighbors on your vision for what you want your waterways to look like, how you want your infrastructure to ensure you have safe tap water. We need to get the word out, because these issues are hidden for most people. They don't know what the water and wastewater infrastructure is. A lot of people think their drinking water comes from the ocean. So you have to get the word out, let them know this is our waterway, this is where we get our drinking water, this is what we want for our community, to make it beautiful, to make it safe, to make it a healthy place for our communities, and we can get jobs going right here in our community, good jobs for our citizens in making that happen.
Thank you.
So there's $2 or $3 trillion worth of need, and there's about $2 trillion in pension plans right now. And if we found a way, not only, by the way, every dollar spent by a pensioner does in a community create about $2 or $2.30 of other revenue and generated tax activity. So let's put that issue aside for a second. But if you look at this $2 trillion of pension assets that could be fiduciarily invested well, and this $3 trillion of need, and the need being created in ways or yearning for us to have a better quality of life. And if we found some of the mojo on Wall Street and other places, the alliances that people talked about creating here, and really said, if you come, we will build it. That's a big idea that turns around America.
All right. Well, this has been an amazing panel. We just scraped the surface of the topic. I have to say that within my own worldview of where we need to go, it's the combination of all that's been said. And this question of talking to ourselves is probably the biggest challenge. And how do we actually go from grass tops to grassroots? How do we put this in the minds and the hearts and make it real for folks, the little old lady in her house, and how this asthma is going to affect her, or how this job opportunity is going to affect their grandchild? Because it is through the voices of folks in the community that come to the legislators who are trying to be mediocre and say, you can't be mediocre. You need to fix what's broken, and we'll hold you accountable to that. So we do need to figure out a massive each one reach one and public education program to rebuild America the right way. Let's thank our panelists for an amazing conversation, and have a good conference.